You were taught to believe in a safe and predictable world, one where you attended ball games, parties, and school without fear of harm. But what if, in a moment, that world was shattered by the murder of your loved one? What would you do, and how would you go on?
Welcome to the Grief Relief Show with mother-daughter team doctors Gloria and Heidi Horsley, brought to you by the Open to Hope Foundation, helping people find hope after loss. Now, here's Dr. Gloria and Dr. Heidi.
Welcome to the Grief Relief Show. I'm your host, Dr. Gloria Horsley, with my co-host, Dr. Heidi Horsley. The Grief Relief Show is a special show because it's a show for you, about you and the traumas that have happened in your life. We know that with Newtown and a lot of the other disasters that have come along recently, that a lot of you do have trauma, and a lot of you have had trauma, and you have events that have come up. And today we've got some great people and some experts that are going to be on to help you.
Hi, Mom. Well, we are a mother-daughter team, and we do a weekly series, and we are very excited about our guest today. We have Rhoda Stern today, and she's got a really incredible story. Her son Christopher was murdered, and now she works in San Quentin with murderers.
Wow, yeah, and we've got a great tape of her in San Quentin that has been given to us by a fantastic woman who is named Leslie Neal, and we want to thank Leslie because she has produced a documentary on people that work at San Quentin and help out. And her clip's called the Unlikely Friends clip, courtesy of Chance Films, and we'll be showing that. And then we've got Dale Larson, right? You want to talk about Dr. Dale?
Dr. Dale Larson, and I recently saw him on the news because he is an expert on traumatic loss, and he was speaking about the Newtown tragedy, and he speaks all over the country and actually all over the world, and writes about traumatic loss, and he'll be talking to us a lot today. And he's also a professor at Santa Clara University.
Wow, great. Well, also, Heidi, you yourself have done a lot with traumatic loss as far as 9/11 goes. You want to talk about that a little bit?
I have. First, I'm teaching a class on traumatic loss at Columbia, and it's the first class ever taught out of the School of Social Work. And I also worked for 10 years with families that lost a firefighter in the World Trade Center. And we did a study looking at traumatic loss over time, and we watched how these families transformed their loss and found hope again. And that's really what our show is about. How do you transform your life after loss, and how do you find hope again?
So we want to start with you today with this tape from Rhoda Stern, about Rhoda Stern, because we think it's going to help you to realize the kinds of things that you can do and the kind of hope there is after loss. So let's roll that tape.
Rhoda Stern's only son, Christopher, was shot to death by a roommate in an early morning argument.
You know, as a mom, you just want to hug them and put the Band-Aids on and everything to be okay. You know, in this situation, it's never going to be. It's just so.
For years, she searched for ways to transform her grief. But it wasn't until she was invited to share her personal story with a group of murderers at California's San Quentin State Prison that she found the peace she was looking for.
So my son Christopher Robin was murdered 15 years ago, March 21st, and he was 21 years old. He was at school, and he was killed by his school roommate. You feel like you've been run over by a semi-tractor trailer truck, but there's no bruises, there's no scars. You know, you just feel completely devastated, hurt, shocked. I lost everything a body can lose in the first 5 minutes, you know, because the shock was so intense. You know, and this incredible wall hits you that, you know, there's not going to be any more pictures. There's not going to be any more hugs. You know, you're not going to be a grandmother. You're not going to see a wedding. And you just, it's a lot. I mean, I've been practicing this for 15 years and it's still a lot.
Well, Heidi, very moving, and we've got Rhoda here with us, and let's bring her in. Hi, Rhoda. Oh, thank you so much for coming in, Radha. And what a piece.
Oh,
Isn't
it
it,
is.
Heidi?
It's an unbelievable story.
Yeah,
Really unbelievable.
hard to watch.
Yeah,
I bet.
yeah. Isn't that incredible, even after this time, to watch yourself
Yeah.
in retrospect? Well, tell us about what you're doing at San Quentin and Christopher Robin. We'll talk a little bit about how he died first.
You want to talk about how he died first?
Yeah.
Christopher was killed by his school roommate because he put dishes in the wrong cabinet.
Wow.
So, you know, a bravado kind of fight in the morning had started, and Mark James Taylor, who shot Chris, went into his bedroom. He had to go through 2 doors, come back through 2 doors, brought a gun and shot him 4 times. Wow. And Christopher actually had his back to the scene. So he was already thought it was over, and you know, it was just anger, and you know, guns do what they're supposed to do. If they're shot. So he didn't make it to the hospital. We didn't have a chance to donate his organs, which I'm sort of sad about. And you know, your life just changes, as it said there. And from the beginning, I knew that I wanted to live, and not just live, but thrive. And also
From the very beginning?
From the very
Wow.
beginning. And also that, you know, you're thrown into this relationship with a person, in this case the perpetrator, against your will. You know, I think about him all the time because he took my son. So how do you find a place in yourself where that's comfortable? You know, I needed like a quiet relationship instead of a relationship that was eating me alive with the perpetrator. And the San Quentin work, I think, gave that to me, because I can remember my mother saying, always give people the benefit of the doubt. And I felt like this was not a very nice person to be so angry and to take my son. And but at the same time, I also wanted to give him the benefit of the doubt. It was this, you know, a terrible mistake. If a person made a terrible mistake, I would understand it, you know, but, you know, what really happened? And so I went on this journey with, they call it surrogate work, with other inmates, talking about my story. And
How many years out were you before you started doing that?
it was 7.
Okay, so there's some time in between when our audience is out there and they're saying, wow, yeah, I had a death recently or whatever.
Oh, no. If someone told me at year 1 or year 2 I'd be working in San Quentin, I would have told them they were crazy, because you're not ready. I mean, and it's not just us, you know, the men who are incarcerated, they're not ready to do the work that they need to do to even listen to a person like me. You know, and understand either. You know, in the beginning, they're thrown into this environment they don't know. Like we're thrown into an environment we don't know, this horrible grief, this trauma, right? And their families grieve too, and I think people, you know, sometimes don't always remember that.
Yes, I think we do. I always think about, wow, those families out there that almost, they have to change their names.
Yeah.
And
And
what
what
think
if
about that, Heidi?
yeah.
The families ever?
And what if the shoe was on the other foot? I mean, I don't think my son would have ever done something like that, but what if I was visiting him, you know? Yeah.
So let me ask you, we had mentioned the Compassionate Friends, and that's a very soft spot for us, isn't it, Heidi?
That's a wonderful organization.
And you got in touch with them and got
I
involved
was
with
in
them?
Compassionate Friends within 2 weeks.
Yeah. Heidi, why
And-
don't you just mention what Compassionate Friends is quickly for our audience?
For people out there that don't know about Compassionate Friends is an international organization, and they have, 650 chapters worldwide, and it's peer-to-peer support, which Radha can speak to. So it's getting people together that have lost siblings or children to talk about their experiences. And the reason I love it is because it normalizes a lot of what we're going through.
Yeah, and it was the first time I didn't feel so alone. I mean, my family was incredible, and I never felt alone. But I mean, familiar territory. I walked into a group of people that completely understood where I was.
And
you
they
know?
all had children die.
Right.
Yeah.
You know, and you know, I dragged my daughter along with us, and you know, it was hard, but it was a comfort. And then you know, people sort of adopt you, and then now I adopt people and take care of them, and
You know, I'm thinking with the prisoner thing that maybe Compassionate Friends helped you to even be able to do that, because you had been in a group and talked.
Yeah.
So when you went there, it wasn't totally foreign to go around people and talk about it.
Yeah, and also, you know, we get used to our stories. Like I can talk about Chris's murder now and not cry most of the time. You know, I have to be careful when I tell people the first time, because, you know, it's an interesting phenomena. You meet people that don't even know that you had a person in your life that was murdered, right? So, or never knew Chris. And so when you talk about it, you know, people are just, sometimes they stop me you know, I'm pretty used to it, but you also have to take that in consideration.
They've
because
never heard it before, but you've told it a lot.
a
So
lot.
you've heard
So
your
I've had
story, they haven't.
almost 17 years of practice, right? So
Yeah.
yeah.
That makes sense.
So that's another issue.
Now
also.
tell me what you think. Do the prisoners get out of it, and what do you get out of going? And you know, how
It's
does
the
that
first time that they really understand what damage, or for lack of a better word, that they raised in their lives with their crime. You know, they actually see somebody who's been affected by it. You know, so you know, I'm a mother. You know, maybe, and you know, they can relate to what their mother might be going through, or the mother of the person whose life they took. I mean, it's real when you're sitting in front of someone. And it's very difficult for them. It's a real, they call it sitting in the fire. You know, it's dealing with all that stuff, and it's transformational. I mean, I've seen it sort of unpack itself. The work that I've been doing with a group of men now for about 8 years. You know how it affects them, and it puts them into another perspective. And then they also, because they're, it's like the pebble in the pond. You know, it makes them really understand. You know what they created. Because it's not just them, you know, it's the community, it's their family. You know, it's far-reaching.
So maybe they've never even thought about it, and watching you and your emotions, it kind of unlocks their heart, and they really start thinking about, wow,
Yeah.
the impact that this has had
Yeah.
on so many people, the impact that this murder has had.
Yeah. So,
You know, let's have Dr. Dale Larson come in and talk to him about some of the psychological aspects of this thing, huh, Heidi? And Dr. Dale. Hi, Dr. Dale. Nice to see you. And then we want to take some questions from our studio audience. We've got a great audience here. Well, Dale, quite a story we've been hearing about, you know, murder and those kind of things. I wanted to ask you, I happened to meet a man the other day, and while I was waiting to have lunch with a friend, and I stopped and talked to him and asked him how he was doing, and he said, good. And he said, what are you doing? And I said, Heidi and I, my daughter, do a grief show on public access. And he said, oh, you know, and I said, we're doing a show on trauma. And he said, all of a sudden he stopped and he said, well, I had a trauma. And I'm like, oh, really? And he said, yeah, 9/11, I was in the building right next door to the Twin Trade Towers. And he said, I remember this guy, the plane hit, we thought it was a bomb. And he said, we all ran to the window and looked out. We were in the next building. He said, I saw a man fly down, jump off the top of the building. I'll never forget. And the guys are telling me this. His necktie went up in the air like this, and then the man opened his coat and said, see the lining of my jacket? I could see the lining of his coat. And then he said, and then I saw the plane hit the second tower, and I could tell you what the tail number was on that plane. And he said, I have not talked about this since for 10 years. He says, this is the first time I have told this story. He said, when it first happened, I was telling everybody. So what about that? This, you know, what about that trauma? Is it okay? And he basically looked at me. I knew what he was asking me. Is it okay? Am I okay that I haven't told this story?
That's a really great question. I think it's just really okay that he encountered you, and what he saw was someone who could listen to this experience. He just knew that you could listen. I heard that with Radha was sharing also. She was saying how hard it is sometimes to talk about this. One of the things we know from research on all this is that there are incredible social constraints against disclosing these things because the rest of the world isn't really ready to hear about it. The responses are consistently kind of changing the topic, turning away from you a little bit, and you get the message. It's not an uncaring response, although it feels that way sometimes. But people aren't ready to really engage with that. They don't know how to respond, and that's why compassionate friends, and that's why running into you and finding other people who can, and counselors and other people who can really provide the kind of empathy, and compassionate friends, you have that instant empathy,
Right.
which is just invaluable because you need to feel understood. You know, I want to say that, you know, I think you end up feeling in these experiences so completely alone. And you feel, we call it the fallacy of uniqueness in research, the belief that I alone am having this experience, but no one else could possibly be having this experience. It's so strange, bizarre, unusual, awful. And then we keep it inside, and our friends cannot provide all the support. I think friends are great, family is great. But you know, after about the second or third luncheon meeting with your friend, They're
Yeah.
saying, well, are you over the loss of your, are you getting over it? Are you getting back to normal?
Right.
Everyone wants you to get back to normal.
But normal is
normal
what you used
doesn't
to
exist
be.
anymore.
Right.
It's what you used to be.
It's
what
a
you
new
used to
normal.
be.
What you used
But
to be.
you had a dividing line in your life. There was this part of my life, and then there's this other, which everyone tells me, every bereaved parent tells me that they had life before the event, and there's life after the event. And they're totally,
Like they say you have to create a new normal. And like you
New
said,
normal.
yeah, we don't
Yeah.
just get over it, we learn to transform it.
Yeah.
should transform.
You know, one of the things that's interesting with the 9/11 study that Heidi's been working with at Columbia, you've been following those widows for how many years and families?
We followed them for 10 years.
So they had, it's kind of interesting, they had an opportunity to talk about it for 10 years and have somebody who was interested in saying, how are you doing? Would, yeah, and they're doing pretty well too, aren't they?
They are, but it took a lot longer than the world wants to feel that it does. It takes a long time when we love someone so much to fully, you know, find hope again, and also to embrace our new identities. Who are you without Christopher in your life? Who am I without Scott? You know, so it takes longer, I think.
I think it does, and I think that one of the things that we found in research is that growth and distress coexist, so that you're
good
not
point.
distress-free.
Yes.
You can still cry when you see that. You're moved. That's, I think, because we still have those connections. And now the field is really saying we need continuing bonds, but we've got to find a way to carry the person in our heart so that we're not having extreme reactions every day.
Right.
But we also don't lose touch, so that we can have that love that we feel for this person without all the distress, which
Well,
is the ultimate.
I think we should do
Yeah.
some touch right now, Heidi, and have you take some questions from our audience.
Okay.
All right. Here's someone.
Okay, and what is your name?
My name is Julia O'Daly, and I have a question for Rada. Rada, what happened to the perpetrator?
Mark Taylor is serving a sentence of 19 and a half to life. He's been in various prisons, and he was up for parole last July, and he got a 7-year denial. So 6 years we'll go back and see how he's doing, but that's what happened to the perpetrator.
Hello, and your name?
Hi, my name is Anthony, and my question is for Adele. Doctor, I was wondering, after someone experiences trauma who's close to me, what is the best way for me to help them out?
Great question. I think it's a question we all ask ourselves. And we're all thinking, oh, I'm not a trained counselor. I'm not a therapist. What can I possibly do? But, you know, I think the same principles apply, which is really being available and listening. You can't get in any trouble listening. You can't listen your way into trouble. And you don't have to really do anything. Human presence is healing in itself. One of the things we know about trauma healing is that we have to find a way to be with that in some relationship to it while we feel safe. And another human being, a caring person who has caring for us, being with us in that moment that we're with our experience is a healing experience. So Henry Nouwen, who is a theologian, wrote about the difference between 0 and 1. And you know, the 1 is very important. And I think that it's very important that you show up. So my message is really, we have to show up for people who are experiencing these things. We have to, if they want support, if they feel that they are having a little trouble with it and they want to talk, I believe that everyone should have an opportunity to get support. I think it's very important that we as a culture provide that. Yeah.
I think that is such a good point, because early on, you want to do something for people and fix it, and what they really need is just someone to sit there, acknowledge, and validate. They don't need a lot of books, self-help books. They don't need there's no way to fix it.
There's a cascade of advice that always comes pouring down. In fact, when you ask bereaved people and people who have been traumatized, how were the responses of others, the majority of responses people report are not very helpful. Because they're giving advice, we're trying to be helpful in all the ways we're normally helpful. Let's problem solve. But you can't problem solve this. You can't just take it and say, let's do this and do that. You have to show up. And,
Before we take another question, I don't want to forget, I almost forgot, we've got a couple of books here. Rada has a book that's coming out called Grief Prints, and we're excited about that, a practical guide for supporting a grieving person. And Dr. Dale has one called The Helper's Journey, working with people facing grief, loss, and life-threatening illnesses. Great. So let's make sure we get a picture of those on camera. All right, we've got another question.
Okay, here we go.
Hi, my name is Marty, and my question is for Dale. What do you feel? How do you feel about people who have experienced a traumatic loss taking antidepressants?
What we often find is that we think they're really being helpful because we are having this placebo effect. And they, in conjunction with counseling or compassionate friends, seem to work better. There are some medications that are being recommended for trauma versus major depressive disorder versus prolonged grief disorder, which we haven't really had any pharmacotherapy for. But my basic stance toward it is you have to really consult with folks in medicine, work with somebody who understands that grief is not depression, because this is one of the primary confusions that happens out there. Primary care providers, your basic primary care physician, very often it's tough for them in the 10-minute session to really figure out, well, are you depressed or are you grieving? And now we have, with the DSM-5, with the bereavement exclusion being removed, which is happening in April of this year, we're going to have a situation where there's a potential for more antidepressants being prescribed. So the physicians have to really get more education that they're not going to be prescribing them for things routinely. And we also have to really ourselves kind of look at how can we get support for ourselves. And I think that there can be some role for major depression of antidepressants, but I think when we look at the research, we see that for mild to moderate depression, it isn't really. And I think that if you look at bereavement, we know that in Norway, 78% of mothers who had lost their children qualified for complicated grief diagnosis. So you have just in everyday bereaved people are having pretty high levels of depression, and in the first 6 months, 5 months, you have very high frequency of major depression.
I guess I'd like to say, if you are recently bereaved and you have never been on antidepressants, do not go to a psychiatrist first. Go to a psychologist or a counselor that's an expert on grief and loss, and then if they feel like they need to refer you, they can refer you, because if you go to a psychiatrist, you may end up on an antidepressant when you don't need one, because grief often does look like depression early on.
However, in defense of maybe some psychiatrists out there who are experts in depression, there is a caveat to that.
I wouldn't go there first.
Right.
I would go there, but it wouldn't be my first place to go.
Okay.
It's a very tricky issue. I mean, we're struggling with it. In England now, they're really opting for cognitive behavioral therapy, almost first with depression, but it's kind of an online. I really like a therapist or some other for people who are having a difficult time. One thing I want to say about all this is that in terms of professional assistance, the two questions you have to ask are you having trouble dealing with this loss? And the second is, would you like assistance? If people don't answer yes to both those questions, we shouldn't be giving them support, because it's not going to work anyhow. You have to have motivation. And I think that's very important. But this bereavement exclusion being eliminated is a huge issue for our culture, and it's a very controversial topic, and I think we're all going to be wrestling with it. And I think it's a tough one. We have a huge pharmaceutical industry making $20 billion a year. They're highly motivated. They're advertising to us saying, "Ask your physician if this would be appropriate." So we have a lot of pressure for that. But we also have to get support to people who are seriously in trouble, which can happen with a traumatic loss early on. And we have to use all the means we possibly can.
Okay, did we have one more question before?
The shootings in Connecticut were something that, everybody saw. You couldn't get away from it. And, I'm thinking about you, Radha, having been through such a traumatic loss, to go and talk about it over and over and kind of re-experience it. And I'm just wondering, for people who may have had something in the past and then get re-exposed to this kind of stuff, or even people who haven't had anything traumatic happened to them recently or in their lives, what might be some of the things to look out for, you know, in ourselves that we should notice if we are experiencing some sort of trauma just by virtue of seeing this on TV in such a big way?
Great question. Thank you.
Well, my heart just drops because I know exactly how the parents feel, right? So my heart just, the first thing that happens is my heart just drops. And then I give myself permission to talk about it. If people, you know, I say, this Newtown was really hard for me because I just feel for every parent, you know, and it's not just the Newtowns, it's every day you read in the paper, and my heart just sinks.
You know what? We're going to have to close on your heart. I mean, that's such a great question, and we're going to have to wrap up the show, so.
This has been the Grief Relief Show, hosted by mother-daughter team Doctors Gloria and Heidi Horsley. This show has been brought to you by the Open to Hope Foundation, helping people find hope after loss. Be sure to visit opentohope.com, where you can listen to radio programs, watch Open to Hope TV, read articles, and view books. You can also join Dr. Gloria and Dr. Heidi on Twitter and Facebook and put your events on their international calendar. Thanks for watching, and remember, others have been there and made it, and you can too.